Commander Kale Vorn stood alone in the Great Hall of the Galactic Coalition. Around him, warriors from many alien species watched with cold eyes. The Velkorians were tall beings with skin like glass that reflected light in beautiful patterns. The Chithari were insect-like creatures who made clicking sounds with their mouths. The Nephiran observers stood silent, their pale faces showing small smiles. They were all looking at his scars. Kale's body told the story of 30 years of human wars. A long mark crossed his jaw from an old battle on Mars. Burned skin covered his left arm from a fire on Europa. Smaller marks covered his hands, his neck, his chest. Each scar was a memory. Each one was a lesson learned in blood. Among humans, these marks were signs of honor. They showed courage. They proved survival. But here, among the aliens, they meant something different. These species could heal themselves perfectly. They had energy shields to protect their bodies. They had hard shells that weapons could not break. To them, scars were proof of weakness. Scars meant failure. High Commander Zethex of the Velkorians stepped forward. His glass-like body sparkled under the lights. His voice was smooth but filled with pride. The coalition needed a champion, he announced. Someone must lead the combined fleet against the Devourer swarm. This enemy was a hive mind, a connected intelligence that was eating entire star systems along the edge of the galaxy. Zethex nominated himself. He spoke of Velkorian superiority. He spoke of 12,000 years of military excellence. The crowd nodded in agreement. Then someone mentioned Kale's name. Earth had sent him as their candidate. Laughter filled the hall. Zethex turned to look at the human. His crystal features twisted into mockery. "The scarred one?" he said. Perhaps he could frighten the swarm with his collection of failures written on his flesh. More laughter. Even the serious Nephiran allowed themselves to smile. Kale said nothing. He had learned long ago that words rarely changed minds. Only actions mattered. He stood straight and kept his face calm while they voted. Zethex won easily. Kale was given a small advisory role. It was a meaningless position, given only to keep Earth from complaining. That night, Kale sat alone in his quarters. He studied the intelligence reports about the Devourer swarm. What he found worried him deeply. The coalition's battle plan relied on simple force. They would attack with overwhelming numbers. They would use their regeneration abilities to survive losses. They would crush the enemy through pure power. But the swarm was different from any enemy they had faced. It learned. It adapted. It changed its tactics during battle. Kale had seen similar enemies before. He knew that predictable strategies would fail against such a foe. He wrote new proposals. He suggested different tactics. Human military doctrine taught flexibility. It taught deception. It taught the value of surprise. These methods had helped humanity survive countless wars against stronger enemies. He sent his proposals to the coalition command. The response came quickly. Primitive tactics from a primitive species. They did not even read his ideas. Kale requested a private meeting with Zethex. Perhaps away from the political crowd. The Velkorian would listen to reason. Perhaps logic would succeed where public argument had failed. Zethex received him in a private chamber. Other Velkorian officers stood around their commander, their crystal bodies glittering. Kale presented his concerns calmly. He explained how the swarm adapted. He warned about predictable tactics. He asked for flexibility in the battle plan. Zethex raised one hand to stop him. "Human," he said, "your species has traveled among stars for barely 3 centuries. Mine has commanded fleets for 12,000 years. He pointed at Kale's scarred face. Your marks show me everything I need to know about human military ability. You survived through luck and stubbornness. Nothing more. Kale felt old anger rising inside him. This anger had carried him through impossible battles. It had kept him fighting when others surrendered. But he controlled it now. As he always did, he asked one final question. "And if your tactics fail? What then?" Zethex smiled without warmth. "They will not fail. But if you lack faith in coalition leadership, perhaps Earth's representative should reconsider his participation. The message was clear. Kale was being told to leave. His experience did not matter. His warnings were worthless. His scars made him lesser in their eyes. He could stay and be ignored. He could watch them make mistakes and say nothing. He could be the quiet human in the corner, while superior beings led the galaxy to disaster. Or he could walk away. Kale reached up and removed his coalition advisory insignia. He placed it gently on Zythex's desk. The small metal badge clicked against the polished surface. "You will need warriors who know how to bleed," Kale said quietly. "When that day comes, you will know where to find humanity." He turned and walked out of the chamber. His footsteps echoed in the silent hall. He walked through the station corridors without looking back. He boarded a transport ship and set course for Earth. Behind him, the alien delegates exchanged satisfied looks. The embarrassing human with his ugly scars was finally gone. They could proceed with their perfect plans without his primitive suggestions. None of them understood what they had just done. None of them knew what they had set in motion. The scarred human was going home. But he was not giving up. He was not surrendering. He was preparing. He was planning. He was gathering his strength for the battle that he knew would come. They had mocked his scars and sent him away. They would learn to regret that choice. 6 months passed after Kale left the coalition. The great alien fleet launched against the Devourer swarm with enormous celebration. 3,000 warships from 15 species flew together. High Commander Zythex led them proudly. News reporters called it the greatest military force in galactic history. Victory seemed certain. Kale watched the news from his family's farmhouse in Montana, on Earth. The old wooden house sat in a valley, surrounded by mountains. Snow covered the peaks. Wind moved through the pine trees. It was peaceful here, far from the politics of space. He had returned to the land of his ancestors. He worked the soil with his hands. He repaired old farm equipment. He chopped wood for the fire. Simple work. Honest work. But his mind never stopped thinking about what was happening among the stars. The media coverage was full of confidence. Military experts predicted total victory within weeks. They showed images of the massive coalition fleet. They interviewed proud alien commanders. Humanity's small contribution of 12 frigates was barely mentioned. Old soldiers began appearing at Kale's door. These were men and women who had served under his command in past wars. They came one by one, then in small groups. They had seen the same intelligence reports he had seen. They understood what others did not. Colonel Maya Chen arrived on a cold morning. She had been Kale's second in command for 15 years. Her black hair was now touched with gray, but her eyes were still sharp. "The brass back on Luna thinks I am paranoid," she said. They were reinforcing an old barn that would soon become something more important. They call the coalition campaign a historic partnership. Kale hammered a nail into place. "It is a historic mistake," he replied. "The swarm does not fight like anything they have faced. It learns. It adapts. And it never stops." 3 weeks into the campaign, the first bad reports came. Initial battles had been successful. Too successful. The swarm retreated easily. The coalition fleet pushed deeper into enemy territory. Commanders celebrated their progress. Zethex gave confident speeches. Then the swarm counterattacked. It used tactics no one had seen before. It had studied coalition weapons and shields. It had learned their weaknesses. Now, it exploited them without mercy. The Valkorians could normally heal any wound, but the swarm created new acids that stopped their bodies from regenerating. The Chithari communicated through mental links with their hive groups, but the swarm produced signals that jammed their coordination. The Nephiron could see glimpses of the future, but the swarm's chaotic attacks overwhelmed their predictions. 800 ships were lost in a single day. Zythex ordered retreat, but retreat became disaster. Ships fled in all directions. Coalition species began blaming each other. The unified command fell apart. On Earth, governments scrambled. The 12 human frigates had been among the first losses. They had been sacrificed in a delaying action. Cannon fodder for the superior beings who had mocked them. The Coalition Council sent urgent messages to Earth. Send more ships. Place them under Zythex's command. Help save the campaign. The message beneath the words was clear. They needed expendable forces. They needed bodies to throw at the enemy while superior species regrouped, Earth's leaders argued. Some wanted to help, fearing isolation. Others wanted independence. Preferring to build defenses at home, the debate continued for weeks, while the swarm consumed 3 more star systems. During this chaos, unexpected visitors arrived at Kale's Montana compound. They were young alien officers. A Velkorian lieutenant with cracks in her crystal skin. A Chithari, who had lost her entire sister group. A Nefaran, who had foreseen terrible futures and come anyway. They had not been sent by their governments. They came on their own choice. Lieutenant Vren was the Velkorian. Her cracked skin caught the morning light as she stood before Kale. Among her people, such damage was shameful. She would be considered flawed, imperfect. But she stood straight and spoke clearly. Our commanders will not listen, she said. But we have seen the swarm with our own eyes. We know what is needed. We need someone who understands sacrifice. Someone who knows what it means to be wounded. And keep fighting. Kale looked at the small group of aliens. They represented species that had mocked him. Species that had dismissed his experience. Species that had driven him away with laughter. Now they stood in his farmyard, asking him to save them. Part of him wanted to refuse. Let them face the results of their arrogance. Let them learn the hard lessons that humanity had learned through thousands of years of war. But then he looked closer. He saw the fear in Vren's eyes. He saw the grief in the Chithari, who had lost everyone she loved. He saw the courage in the Nefaran, who knew he might die and came anyway. They were not their leaders, they were soldiers. And soldiers deserved better than to die for the pride of fools. I will not serve under Zythex, Kale said finally. And I will not waste lives on tactics that have already failed. Then what will you do? Vren asked. Kale walked toward the barn. Inside, maps covered the walls. Star charts showed enemy positions. Intelligence reports filled the tables. His old soldiers stood ready, waiting. Something your coalition has never tried, he said. Something human. Word spread quietly through secret channels. Soldiers who had lost faith in their commanders. Units that had been abandoned. Species whose warriors had been sacrificed by coalition orders. They heard whispers about the scarred human who had walked away, the one who had warned them, the one they had mocked. Now he was building an army. Not a coalition force. Not an Earth force. Something new. Something made from survivors and forgotten warriors. Kale Vorn was preparing to fight, and this time he would fight his way. The coalition officially condemned Kale's operation. They called it unauthorized and dangerous. High Commander Zythex issued orders for his arrest. The charges claimed Kale was hurting the war effort. Earth's government stayed silent. They did not support him openly, but they did not stop him either. It did not matter. Volunteers kept coming. Kyle established his headquarters on Viridia Station. This was a trading post in unclaimed space, far from coalition control. The station's leaders welcomed his growing force. They needed protection from the swarm. Kale could provide it. Within 2 months, he commanded nearly 200 ships. These were not the finest vessels in the galaxy. They were damaged ships. Old models. Vessels that other navies had thrown away. His crews were equally mismatched. Velkorians who bore combat scars and had been rejected by their own people. Chithari individuals who had lost their mental connection to their hives. Nefaran seers who had failed to predict coalition defeats, and humans from every corner of Earth's military. Kale called them the Scarred. He gathered them in the station's largest cargo bay for their first full assembly. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species stood before him. Their bodies showed marks of battle. Their eyes showed memories of loss. They had all been rejected, They had all been told they were not good enough. Kale stood on a raised platform and spoke. "Every mark on your body is a lesson," he said. His voice was calm but strong. "Every wound is proof that you faced something terrible and survived. The Coalition sees weakness in our scars. I see something different. I see knowledge. I see experience. I see warriors who know what it means to hurt, to bleed, to fall down and get back up again." He organized them according to human military principles. But he adapted these methods for his unique force. He created mixed teams combining different species. Valkorian strength paired with human flexibility. Chithari coordination paired with Nephiron prediction. Each species had weaknesses, but together, they covered each other's gaps. He trained them without rest. But he did not teach them the rigid formations that Coalition forces used. Instead, he taught fluid responses. Quick changes, unexpected movements. Most importantly, he taught them to think like humans. "The swarm adapts," he explained during training sessions. "It learns from every battle. So we must be unpredictable. We must show it one thing and do another. We must cause pain in ways it cannot expect." He introduced concepts that confused his alien officers at first. Feints, ambushes, false retreats, mind games. The Valkorians struggled with the idea of appearing weak, on purpose. The Chithari found deception uncomfortable. The Nephiran were used to following their visions of the future. Now they had to act against their own predictions to create confusion. But they learned. Slowly and painfully, they learned. Their first real battle came when a swarm force moved toward a refugee convoy. Thousands of civilians were fleeing the destroyed Keth system. Coalition forces were too far away to help. Zethex's command declared the convoy acceptable losses. Kael moved to intercept with only 30 ships. Colonel Chen studied the enemy numbers. "We are outnumbered 8-1, she observed. "Good," Kael replied. "They will underestimate us." The battle that followed became famous across the galaxy. Kael did not attack the swarm directly. Instead, he scattered his ships among a field of asteroids. The rocky debris provided cover and confusion. He ordered his ships to broadcast fake signals on captured swarm frequencies. These false messages suggested a much larger force was hiding nearby. The swarm expected patterns. It expected predictable behavior. Instead, it found chaos. Its adaptive thinking could not process the contradictory information. Its responses became slow and uncertain. Groups of organisms received conflicting orders. Defensive formations fell apart. When Kael finally concentrated his force for a direct strike, he did not target the swarm's warriors. He targeted the coordination nodes. These were special organisms that helped the swarm communicate. Without them, the enemy could not function as a unified mind. The strike was precise and devastating. The swarm force did not retreat. It scattered. Individual organisms lost their connection to each other. They reverted to basic instincts, attacking randomly without strategy. Kael's ships hunted them carefully while the refugee convoy escaped to safety. The Scarred lost 4 ships. The swarm lost over 200 organisms. More importantly, they destroyed the communication network for an entire enemy battle group. News of the victory spread quickly. Coalition official channels tried to minimize it. They called it a small skirmish. But soldiers in the field knew the truth. They had seen what the Scarred had done with rejected ships and forgotten warriors. More volunteers came to Viridia. More ships arrived. More species joined. Kael received a private message from the Nephiron Observer Corps. These were the most powerful seers in the galaxy. They had stayed neutral in coalition politics. But now they reached out to him. They had seen something in their visions. Multiple possible futures existed. In most of them, the swarm eventually consumed everything. The galaxy died in darkness. But in a small number of futures, a different ending appeared. And those futures were growing stronger. They all had one thing in common. The Scarred humans stood at their center. "Your choices will shape what comes," the observer told him. "You are becoming a focal point, a place where possibilities meet." Kael studied his star maps. The dark tide of the swarm was spreading. System after system fell, while the coalition stumbled and failed. Then I better start making the right choices, he said. He began planning something that would frighten both allies and enemies. A strike at the swarm's heart. A target that everyone said was impossible to reach. Everyone told him it could not be done. That was exactly why he believed it might work. The coalition was falling apart. Zythex's latest attack had ended in disaster. Nearly half the remaining fleet was destroyed or scattered. 3 more species had left the alliance. They chose to protect their home systems instead of continuing a losing war. The Velkorian High Council had begun secret talks with the swarm. They offered to sacrifice other species if the swarm would consume them last. Kale learned about this betrayal through his Nephiran spies. He had perhaps 6 weeks before the information became public. 6 weeks before the coalition shattered completely. 6 weeks before every species turned against each other while the swarm watched and waited. 6 weeks to do the impossible. He gathered his senior officers in the station's war room. A holographic display showed their target. Nexus Prime. The swarm's coordination hub. It was a structure the size of a small moon. The central brain of the entire hive mind floated in heavily defended space. Billions of warrior organisms surrounded it. Adaptive defenses had evolved to stop every weapon the coalition had ever used. Colonel Chen studied the display with worried eyes. The coalition tried to destroy Nexus Prime twice, she said. They sent over 1,000 ships each time. Total losses both times. They used overwhelming force, Kale replied. They attacked directly with everything they had. The swarm expected that. It was prepared for that. He adjusted the display to show the structure's surface. We are going to do something different. We are going to go inside. The room fell completely silent. Kyle explained his plan. The swarm's greatest strength was also its weakness. It processed everything. It analyzed everything. It tried to understand everything. That meant it could be fed false information. It could be tricked. The scarred fleet would launch a diversionary attack. They would make it look like another conventional assault. Meanwhile, a small team would slip through the chaos. 50 soldiers in modified Kithari biovessels. These ships could mimic swarm organism signals. They would penetrate Nexus Prime's outer defenses while the enemy was distracted. Once inside, they would plant special weapons at critical points. Not explosives. Something more clever. Cognitive disruptors. These devices would create feedback loops in the swarm's thinking network. The hive mind would not be destroyed, but it would be paralyzed, confused, unable to coordinate. Long enough, Kale concluded, for us to reach the central brain and end this war. Lieutenant Vren spoke first. Her crystal skin now bore many scars that she wore with pride. The insertion team will face impossible odds, she said. Even if the deception works, they will be deep inside enemy territory. No support. No escape plan. I know, Kale said. That is why I will lead it personally. Arguments exploded around the room. His officers insisted he was too valuable. The war effort needed his strategic mind. Sending him on a suicide mission was madness. Kale let them finish. Then he spoke quietly. Every scar on my body came from leading at the front. I have never asked anyone to take a risk I would not take myself. That is why you followed me here. That is why any of this works. He looked around the room. He saw beings who had been strangers 1 year ago. Some had been enemies. Some had mocked him. Now they stood together. You have all sacrificed everything to be here. Your homes. Your careers. Your standing with your own species. Some of you have been called traitors. Some of you have been abandoned by your families. His voice grew stronger. You did that because you believed in something bigger than yourselves. Now I am asking you to believe in me one more time. No one argued after that. The next 3 weeks were filled with preparation. The fleet gathered. The insertion team trained. Intelligence was collected and studied. Kale recorded messages for his family. For Earth's leaders. For the Coalition Council that still officially condemned him, his message to Zythex was shortest. I hope you learn to value your scars. They might be all you have left. The assault began on a quiet morning. The scarred fleet appeared at the edge of Nexus Prime's defensive zone. 237 ships against billions of swarm organisms. By every normal measure, it was suicide. But KL had never fought by normal measures. The diversionary attack was designed to be chaotic. Ships advanced and retreated without pattern. Weapons fired at unexpected targets. Formations shifted constantly. The swarm expected logical behavior. It found none. Its responses became slow, uncertain. Organism groups received conflicting orders. Defensive formations left gaps. Through one of those gaps, 50 soldiers in 3 biovessels slipped toward Nexus Prime. KL watched through the vessel's viewing screen as the massive structure grew larger. It was terrible and beautiful, a living moon of connected brain tissue, pulsing with the thoughts of 1 trillion organisms, the mind that had consumed countless species, and he was about to walk inside it. The breach was violent. Acid cutters burned through the outer wall. The team entered corridors that were more like blood vessels. Walls pulsed with alien life. Warrior organisms responded immediately, but the team's Chithari members produced chemical signals that bought precious seconds of confusion. They fought their way deeper. Losses mounted. 20 became 15, then 10. The disruptors were planted at junction after junction. Their effects rippled through the swarm's nervous system. KL lost his left arm to a warrior's claw at the 3rd junction. A Valkorian medic sealed the wound quickly. Another scar, KL thought. Another lesson. They reached the central brain chamber with 6 survivors. The heart of the swarm's intelligence loomed before them. A chamber of pure thought, given physical form. The final disruptor had to be placed directly against the central mass. I will do it, KL said. Everyone else, go to extraction point. That is an order. Vren stepped forward. With respect, Commander. That is a foolish order. Her cracked body was covered in fresh wounds. I am the fastest. And someone must survive to tell the story. Before he could argue, she was moving. A blur of fractured light darting between neural tendrils. The swarm's defenses responded too slowly. She planted the device and triggered it. The effect was immediate. The chamber convulsed. Tendrils thrashed wildly. A scream that was not quite sound tore through the space. Vren was caught in the chaos. KL watched her disappear into thrashing tissue. No extraction possible. Her voice came through the communicator, strained but clear. Trapped. But Commander, it is working. The swarm is confused. It is scared. First time it has ever been scared. Vren. Tell them I was here. Tell them a scarred Valkorian helped save the galaxy. The connection ended. KL gathered the survivors and fought toward escape. Behind them, Nexus Prime was tearing itself apart. Outside, the scarred fleet pressed forward. The swarm's coordination had collapsed. Organisms fought individually without strategy. They were being destroyed. KL's shuttle barely escaped before Nexus Prime imploded into nothing. The battle was over. The legend had just begun. The destruction of Nexus Prime did not end the swarm completely. Nothing could truly destroy an enemy that existed across thousands of star systems. But it broke the hive mind's central control. The swarm split into smaller regional minds. These fragments could be contained. They could be pushed back. They could be defeated one by one. The war would continue for another 10 years. But the tide had turned. The galaxy had hope again. And at the center of that hope stood the scarred. The coalition's remaining leaders tried to claim credit for the victory. They pointed to small support they had provided. They mentioned intelligence they had shared before condemning KL. Zethex gave speeches about coalition values and unified resistance. He never mentioned the rogue human fleet that had actually won the decisive battle. It did not matter. Everyone knew the truth. Kyle returned to Viridia Station to find it transformed. The small trading post had become the headquarters of the most celebrated military force in galactic history. Delegations from every species came with honors and gifts. They brought treaties and requests for alliance. Earth's government officially recognized the Scarred as humanity's primary contribution to galactic security. Other species followed. The Velkorian High Council sent a formal apology. They apologized for their attempted betrayal. They apologized for decades of prejudice against their own scarred citizens. They offered the highest honors to Vren's family. Her cracked face was carved into crystal monuments across their homeworld. The warrior who had been rejected for her imperfections became their greatest hero. Kael accepted the honors with quiet dignity. He gave speeches when required. He attended ceremonies when necessary. He shaped the Scarred into a permanent institution that would outlast him, but those who knew him well saw the weight he carried. He refused to replace his missing arm with a mechanical one. The new scars from Nexus Prime joined the old ones on his body. And ghosts walked behind his eyes. Vren, the others who had fallen, the price of victory. 5 years after the battle, he returned to Montana. The farmhouse had been maintained by retired soldiers. They considered it a sacred place. Kael spent his days as he had before, working the land, training volunteers, writing his memories in books that would become required reading in every military school across the galaxy. Journalists came seeking interviews. He granted very few. Politicians came seeking his support. He gave none. Young soldiers came seeking wisdom. Those he always welcomed. They asked me about victory, he told Colonel Chen one evening. She had retired nearby to watch over him. They sat on the farmhouse porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. They asked about tactics and strategy, and the moment of triumph. They never ask about the cost. They never ask about Vren or the others we lost. They never ask about the pieces of ourselves we left behind. That is because they have not paid those costs yet, Chen replied. When they do, they will understand. I hope they never have to. But he kept teaching, because he knew they would. The Scarred grew over the following decades. They became the galaxy's emergency response force. They went where coalition politics moved too slowly. They recruited from every species. They maintained their tradition of welcoming those whom others rejected. Their symbol became one of the most recognized marks in known space. A simple scar line across a circle representing the galaxy. Kael lived to see the swarm contained. The fragments were reduced to isolated pockets that no longer threatened civilization. He lived to see the coalition reform itself. New rules were written based on lessons learned at terrible cost. He lived to see humanity rise from primitive newcomers to respected partners in galactic leadership. He lived to see his scars become symbols of pride across 100 worlds. On the 20th anniversary of Nexus Prime, the galaxy held celebrations. Kael attended the ceremony on the station that now carried his name. Vorn Station. Thousands of beings gathered there. Humans, Velkorians, Chithari, Nepharan, dozens of other species. They came to honor the fallen and celebrate survival. When called to speak, Kael approached the podium slowly. He was old now. His body carried the weight of a lifetime of war. But his voice remained clear and strong. 20 years ago, I was mocked for my scars, he said. I was told they proved human weakness. I was told that species who could not heal themselves perfectly had nothing to offer a galaxy of superior beings. He paused. He looked out at the assembled faces. Many of them bore scars of their own now. They were wrong. Not because humans are superior. Not because scars are better than perfection. But because the willingness to be wounded matters. The willingness to face pain matters. The willingness to keep fighting when everything tells you to stop. That willingness is what saves civilizations. He touched the empty sleeve where his arm had been. Every one of you carries scars now. Some you can see. Some you cannot. You carry memories of battles and losses and friends who did not come home. Those scars are not weakness. They are proof. Proof that you stood when others ran, that you gave when others took, that you fought for something greater than yourselves. His voice dropped lower. But in the silent hall, every word carried. The galaxy mocked my scars, and I walked away. But I came back. We came back. And we showed them what scarred warriors can do. He straightened his old body. For a moment, he was the commander again. Never be ashamed of your scars. Wear them with pride. Let them remind you of what you survived and what you can do. The hall erupted in applause that shook the walls. Cale Vorn died peacefully 3 years later. His family and old comrades surrounded him. His last words were simple. Tell them I earned every single one. They did. His ashes were scattered in space near where Nexus Prime had fallen. But his legend lived on. In monuments. In histories. In the institution he built. In countless beings across the galaxy who looked at their own scars with new understanding. They had mocked the human warrior's scars, until he walked away and became a legend, and the galaxy never forgot. The end.